The desert didn't whisper, it screamed. Dry wind howled across the flat, cracked earth, stirring whirlwinds of dust that scraped the skin like glass. Beneath the relentless sun, a young woman lay barely conscious, half buried in the sand, her dress torn and clinging to her sun-scorched skin. Her name was Lydia Voss, and by all accounts she was already dead. But she was breathing, shallow, ragged, fading. Her chapped lips moved with effort, mouthing fragments of a prayer her father used to recite in the old wooden chapel back home. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, she couldn't remember the rest. Only the taste of blood and the fire in her veins remained. Just hours earlier, she'd been dragged from the safety of her wagon. The caravan, the righteous, God-fearing people she trusted, had turned on her with venom. One man, a self-declared prophet's aide, had stolen her innocence under the cover of night. She fought, she screamed, she told, but when the sun rose, it was her who stood accused. A harlot, a snake, a temptation sent to bring ruin. She shared a bed with devils. They spat, let the desert judge her, so they left her, tied to a post, skinned to the sky, miles from any soul. Time warped under the sun. Her body burned, but her spirit refused to die. She didn't cry, there was no water left for tears. She just whispered, "Lord, take me or send someone." And then, hoofbeats, heavy, steady, slow, through the shimmering air, a figure emerged on horseback, not a mirage, a man. He dismounted without urgency, stepping closer, boots sinking into the sand, long coat flapping in the wind, wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face, a gun at his side, his silence louder than thunder. He said nothing, just stood there, looking down at her. Then, slowly, he knelt, unstrapped a canteen from his saddle, tipped water into his hand, and pressed it to her lips. She coughed, her cracked mouth trembled. He cut the ropes, gently, wrapped her in a tattered cloth, and lifted her, as if she weighed nothing. No questions, no hesitation. She tried to speak, to ask why, who he was, but her eyes closed, and the darkness took her. The next time she woke, it wasn't to the sun or pain, it was to the faint smell of smoke, a roof of wooden beams, a single window letting in pale light, a blanket tucked under her chin. Annabeth blinked. Her lips were no longer bleeding, her wrists bandaged. She tried to sit up, but her body refused. Then the door creaked. The man entered, carrying a metal plate and a tin mug. His face was weathered, unreadable. A scar ran down, from his brow to his cheek. His boots didn't make a sound on the wooden floor. He set the food beside her bed, didn't speak, didn't stay, and then he left, just like that. She watched the door close, alive, alone, and she realized, this wasn't salvation. Not yet. This was still the desert, but something, or someone, had decided her story wasn't over. Annabeth drifted in and out of sleep for what felt like days. Each time she opened her eyes, the details sharpened, the wooden walls, roughly nailed, and weather-beaten, the smell of tobacco and old leather, a single shelf holding a worn Bible, a rusted lantern, and a bundle of dried herbs hanging from a ceiling beam. There were no windows except one small opening with no glass, just a piece of cloth nailed at the top, fluttering with the wind. She wasn't in a town, she wasn't near help. Wherever she was alone. With him, he came in only twice a day, once in the morning, once at night, always quiet, always steady. The first time he brought soup that smelled of wild rabbit. The second, just a piece of bread and water. No words, no questions, no threats. She watched him with suspicion, then curiosity, then something closer to confusion. He didn't leer, he didn't demand gratitude, he didn't even meet her eyes. For more than a second, he was a wall of silence, a storm held in skin. She tried to speak once. "What's your name?" she rasped. He didn't answer, didn't even pause as he set down the cup. He just nodded once, almost like a courtesy, and turned back through the door. By the third day, she sat up. Her muscles screamed, but she pushed through the pain. Her body had been broken, yes, but something deeper had survived, something defiant. She hobbled to the door and opened it. The light stung her eyes. Outside, the desert stretched in every direction, painted in burnt gold and faded red. Rocks, sand and sagebrush, a dying sky, a place made for ghosts. In the distance, she saw him, chopping wood in front of a barn with a collapsed roof. Swing, crack, silence. Swing, crack, silence. She pushed open the door and stepped out. The air smelled of dust and old rain that never came. Her legs shook, but she refused to be weak. He noticed her. He always noticed, but didn't stop. Just gave a brief nod once again before turning back to his work. She stared at him. Everything about him was contradiction. Powerful, but still. Rough, but gentle. A killer's hands, but not a single thread in his body. Finally, she spoke again. You saved me. He didn't turn. I didn't ask for it, she added bitterly. But thank you. That made him stop. He set the axe down slowly, then walked past her toward the house. As he passed, he said one word. Only one. Eat. His voice was low, dry, not unkind. Then he was gone. Back inside, she found the plate on the table. Beans, smoked meat, bread. More than before, he was giving her strength, but not explanations. That night she found sleep hard to come by. The bed creaked beneath her as she turned, haunted by memories of rope biting her wrists, the laughter of men as they left her in, the sand, the sun blistering her lips. But this place, this quiet place guarded by a man who barely spoke, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a pause in a song she thought had ended. And in that pause, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't dead, and maybe, just maybe, she wasn't done fighting. The days passed slowly. The cabin was silent, but not cold. It was sparse, yes, but not cruel. Each board had been nailed with purpose. Each object had a place. It was a home not built for comfort, but for survival. Annabeth learned quickly. The man, who still hadn't told her his name, lived by routine. At dawn he chopped wood. At midday he tended to the once scrawny horse tied beneath a crooked awning. By evening he sat on the porch with a rifle across his lap, watching the desert like it owed him something. She watched him from the window. He didn't whistle, didn't hum, didn't drink, didn't speak, but he noticed everything. When the firewood stack was low, when the wind shifted, when a coyote howled 2 ridges away, and he noticed her limping toward the well, clutching her side. He noticed when she cried behind the cabin and came back inside pretending her eyes weren't red. He noticed when she didn't finish her food, and always made sure the next meal was something different. Still he said nothing, and yet his silence wasn't empty. It was full, heavy, sacred. Annabeth, raised in a house of sermons and shouted truths, found herself both unnerved and drawn to it. Words had been used against her, twisted, weaponized. The men who left her in the desert had spoken in verses and judgment. But this man, this stranger, he offered no verses, no judgment, just food, warmth, time. She searched the cabin for signs of who he had been. There were no photographs, no letters, only a Bible with the cover worn to threads, a single woman's glove in a drawer, and a child's hair ribbon tucked in the pages of Exodus. He had loved someone once, someone who was now gone. One night curiosity overtook her. As he sat on the porch, eyes fixed on the horizon, she stepped out and stood beside him. The sky was bleeding orange into purple. Stars poked through the fading light. Who did you lose? She asked softly. He didn't flinch, didn't look at her, but his jaw tightened, just enough. I found a ribbon, she continued, and a glove. Was it your wife, your daughter? A long silence, the kind that made your skin itch. Finally he said, sister, one word, sharp as broken glass. Annabeth swallowed. What was her name? He didn't answer. She almost apologized, but something in his face told her not to. Instead she said, I had a brother once, Levi. He drowned trying to save a calf from a flood. My father said it was God's will, but I think sometimes God just looks away. He turned his head ever so slightly. She saw his eyes now pale, clear and tired. He didn't say a word, but he didn't walk away either. That was something. That was a beginning. Later that night she lay on the cot, staring at the low ceiling beams. She didn't know the man's past, but she knew pain when she saw it. And she recognized something else too, something scarier. The way he stood between her and the world, like a wall, like a weapon waiting to be used again. He didn't want her here, but he wouldn't let her go either. And as the wind howled outside the walls, she whispered one truth aloud to the darkness. He's the only reason I'm still alive. By the end of the first week, Annabeth could walk without holding onto the wall. Her legs still shook, and the fever came and went. But the worst had passed. She no longer flinched when the wind pushed the door open. She no longer dreamed of vultures circling above her. The man had become a presence she no longer feared. One morning, she ventured farther toward the broken-down barn behind the cabin. Inside it smelled of dry hay, gun oil and memory. She ran her fingers over the old saddle, over a bullet hole in the wood near the door, over the initials EB carved low into the frame. She didn't ask about it. She already knew what the B stood for. That night she heard gunfire echo through the canyon, 3 shots close. She rushed to the window. He wasn't on the porch. Grabbing the only coat she could find, she stepped outside barefoot, following the trail of crushed weeds leading behind the house. She found him standing over a man's body, a stranger, dirty clothes, a knife in hand, blood soaking through his shirt. The man, her silent guardian, stood like a statue, his gun still warm in his grip. Annabeth stared at the body. Who was he? The man holstered his gun and said simply, "Looking for me?" He nodded once. Her stomach turned. They were still out there, the ones who had left her, and they were still trying to make sure she stayed silent. She looked at the body again. This man would have slit her throat without hesitation. She knew that. She'd seen that same look in the eyes of the one who'd first touched her without permission. "You didn't hesitate," she said, more to herself than to him. He didn't respond. She studied his face. There was no fear there, no guilt, no pride either. "You've done this before," she said quietly, "many times." He turned his back and walked away. Inside the cabin, he poured water into a basin and motioned for her to wash. She did so with trembling hands, the image of the dead man still burning behind her eyelids. Later that night, she found a half-burned letter in the fireplace. It hadn't turned fully to ash. Carefully, she unfolded what was left. The words were faded, but she could make out parts of a name, Amelia Mercer, and the line, "You were never meant to die for what I did." She stared at the name, Eleanor, the sister. She tucked the letter back under the ashes and didn't mention it. When he came back inside, she looked at him differently. "You're not just hiding," she said. "You're punishing yourself." He didn't look at her, but he didn't deny it either. She wanted to say more, to ask him what happened, who Eleanor was to him really, what she did, why she died. But she didn't push, because in the quiet that filled the room, she finally understood something. This man had buried more than people. He had buried whole parts of himself, and the silence wasn't just habit, it was survival. It took her longer than it should have to trust her own voice again, not just to speak, but to speak the truth, and worse, to believe she had the right to be heard. That night, the wind howled through the eaves of the cabin. Dust rattled the window pane. Inside, the fire crackled low. She sat across from him at the table, her fingers wrapped tightly around a tin cup, staring into the black swirl of weak coffee like it might show her the courage she couldn't summon on her own. He was working again, always working, mending, a saddle strapped by the fire, his hands methodical, movement silent. She watched him for a long while, trying to decide if he would leave if she spoke, or worse, if he would stay and say nothing. "I didn't betray anyone," she finally said. His hands paused, her voice dry and low stumbled through the silence. "They said I did, that I invited it, that I smiled too sweet, walked too soft, look at men the wrong way." Still he didn't speak, but his eyes flicked up, just once. That was enough. She exhaled hard. One of them, Jeb Nolan. He wasn't even part of the main group. He came later, said he was a scout, the kind of man that people pretend not to see when they walk by. He came into my tent after dark, drunk, reeking of sweat and whiskey. He put his hand over my mouth so I couldn't scream. Her fingers tight round the cup. I bit him. I fought. I didn't go silent. I made them hear me. And in the morning I told them, I told the whole camp. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. They didn't believe me, or maybe they did, but they couldn't let it be true. Not with who his father was, not with the deals they'd made. So they decided I was the problem. I was the danger, the temptation. She laughed once, a sound dry and bitter. They tied me up, said I was no longer welcome in their God-fearing company, said the desert would judge me. He stood now slowly, and walked to the window. His shadow stretched across the floor. The firelight danced over his back. "I thought someone would come back for me," she said quieter. "I waited the whole day, then the next, but they didn't." She swallowed the knot in her throat. "I would have died out there, just like they planned." He finally turned to face her, and for the first time she didn't see indifference. She saw grief and fury and something deeper, recognition. "You didn't deserve that," he said. 2 words, solid, honest, like stones dropped into a deep well. She nodded, the tears finally coming warm against her cheeks. "I was raised to believe the truth mattered, that if you spoke it, someone would protect you." He walked back to the table, slow and steady, sat down across from her. His eyes never left hers. "It doesn't," he said flatly. "Not out here." She watched him closely. "You learned that the hard way, didn't you?" He looked away, jaw clenched. "She told the truth too, didn't she?" she asked gently. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. She could see it all, over him. "She was your sister, Eleanor." He nodded. "She helped a man, a bleeding stranger, And they killed her for it. She didn't even know what he'd done, he muttered. They dragged her from church steps. No trial, no one to speak for her. I got there too late. His hands trembled now, just slightly. And you've been silent ever since, she whispered. He stood, walked to the fire, then without looking at her said, the world already decided what I am. Doesn't matter what I say anymore. Annabeth rose slowly and stepped beside him. Her hand reached out, rested gently on his arm. You saved me, she said, when no one else would. He finally looked at her, and in that look she saw everything neither of them had said. Pain, loss, guilt, but also something new, something fragile. Hope. The days turned colder, as if the desert itself had leaned in to listen to what had been said. Annabeth no longer counted the hours. She had stopped measuring time by meals or footsteps. Instead, she measured it in silences broken however rarely, and in the way his eyes began to meet hers, even if just for a second longer than before. She had started helping, gathering kindling, cleaning the dust off old jars, mending the edge of the curtain that fluttered in the window like a breath. He didn't ask her to. He didn't stop her either. One morning, while sweeping the corner of the pile of dried leaves and ash, a wooden box, simple, unlocked. Inside was a faded ribbon the color of dusk, a silver locket with a dented edge, and a Bible with the cover nearly falling off. She recognized the name written in soft, childlike script on the first page. Eleanor Burke. The name made her chest tight. She opened the locket with care. Inside was a drawing, crude and innocent, of a girl standing beside a horse, with the word Cass written under it in shaky letters. There was love in those lines, trust, childhood, loss. She closed the box slowly, and placed it back where she found. That night he returned from the canyon with blood on his shirt and a new scar on his forearm. He didn't explain, just watched in silence, and stitched his own wound by the fire. Annabeth watched him with quiet fury, not because he was bleeding, but because he kept doing it alone. Was she younger than you? She asked, voice low. He paused with the needle halfway through his skin. Eleanor. His hand stilled. She was the only one who believed I could be more than what this place made me, he said, not looking up. She said I could leave, that there was good left in me. But she stayed, Annabeth said. She stayed to help someone know one else would touch, he answered, and they used her for it. He finished stitching without flinching, then threw the needle into the fire. I was supposed to protect her. You were a boy, she said gently. I was a coward, he corrected. I stood behind a door and listened to her scream, and I never opened it. Annabeth stepped closer. Her voice trembled, but she spoke anyway. You carried her name in a book. You kept the ribbon. You buried your voice with her, but you still found it to speak for me. He didn't move, didn't speak, but something broke in his shoulders. A quiet surrender. I think you've punished yourself enough, she added. He turned to her, and for the first time he didn't look like a gunslinger. He looked like a man standing at the cross. She'd have liked you, he said softly. Annabeth smiled. I think I would have liked her too. They stood like that for a long moment. Two broken people in a cabin built from silence and regret. But in that moment, something shifted. She wasn't just someone he had saved. She was someone who saw him. The quiet didn't let. Annabeth had grown used to the rhythm of stillness. The soft creak of wood at night. The low rustle of wind dragging across the plain. His footsteps on the porch at dawn. But one afternoon, as she stepped outside with a pail of water from the well, she felt something shift in the air. It wasn't the wind. It was the absence of it. Too still. Too silent. Then came the sound, faint at first. Hooves. More than one. Coming fast. She froze. Water spilled over her boots. He was already on the porch, rifle in hand, face unreadable. He didn't need to say a word. She understood. They had found her. He motioned toward the barn, but she didn't move. Her feet were rooted, trembling. How did they find me? She asked, voice shaking. They always do, he said simply. 3 riders appeared from behind the bridge. Dust kicked up behind them like smoke. All wore dark coats, hats pulled low. One of them she recognized instantly. Levi. Jeb Nolan. She could hardly breathe. The yellow scarf around his neck was stained and tattered, but his smirk hadn't changed. It curled like a brand over his face. Well, look what the desert dragged in, he shouted, slowing his horse. Didn't think you'd crawl out alive, sweetheart. He dismounted with theatrical ease, pulling off his gloves one finger at a time. Wade Mercer stood firm at the steps, rifle lowered, but not by much. This ain't your fight, stranger, Jeb Nolan said, sizing him up. She's a problem that needs cleaning. We got churchmen, lawmen, and witnesses who all say the same. She lied. She seduced. She deserves what's coming. Wade Mercer didn't blink. Jeb Nolan chuckled. You protecting her, you don't even know what she is. Annabeth stepped forward then. Her hands trembled but her voice didn't. I know exactly what I am, she said. And I know what you did. Jeb Nolan's eyes narrowed. You think this man's gonna save you again? You think he'll kill for you? I don't think he has to, she said, staring right at him. But I think he will. That was when Wade Mercer raised the rifle. The first shot dropped the rider to Jeb Nolan's left, clean through the chest. The second sent the third man scrambling, wounded and shrieking into the dust. Jeb Nolan flinched but didn't move. His hand hovered near his belt. Wade Mercer stepped down from the porch slowly. You can leave now, he said, voice low, calm, deadly. Jeb Nolan spat in the dirt. You're a dead man, Wade Mercer shrugged. So are you. The third shot cracked through the canyon. Jeb Nolan staggered back, clutching his arm where the bullet tore through flesh. He dropped to his knees, teeth bared in pain. I didn't kill you, Wade Mercer said, but if you come back, if you even breathe her name again, I will. Jeb Nolan looked up, hatred burning in his eyes. But he didn't speak. He climbed onto his horse with one arm and disappeared over the ridge, dragging blood across the sand. Silence returned. But this time, it wasn't peaceful. Annabeth sat on the steps, heart pounding. He stood beside her, rifle in hand, blood on his sleeve. I told you they'd come, he murmured. She raised her gaze to meet his. And you stayed anyway. He finally met her gaze. You're not by yourself anymore. And somehow, for the first time, since the day they left her to die, she believed it. That night the wind refused to sleep. It howled against the wooden walls like something feral, carrying with it the scent of blood, sweat and unfinished vengeance. Inside the cabin, Annabeth sat by the fire watching Wade Mercer clean his rifle with mechanical calm. Every movement was practiced, precise. There was no fear in his face, only memory. I know they'll come back, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look up. They saw what you did. Jeb Nolan won't forget that. He nodded once. He doesn't have to forget. He just has to stay afraid. She stood crossing her arms. And what if he doesn't? Wade Mercer paused, his hand stilled over the rifle's barrel. Then we bury him, he said. It wasn't bravado, it was fact. The same way you say the sun will rise. Annabeth didn't ask how many men he'd killed before. She didn't want to know, she didn't need to. The way he moved. The way he listened to every creak outside. The way he kept his back to the wall and his weapon within reach. It all spoke louder than any confession. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. I don't want more blood, she said. Then stay inside. She searched his face. And you? He met her eyes. I've lived through worse. There was no time to argue. By dawn, the sun hadn't yet broken the ridge when the first shot rang out. It shattered the morning like glass. Wade Mercer was already outside, crouched behind the water trough. 3 riders were circling the ridge again, and this time they weren't playing games. They weren't there to threaten. They were there to kill. Annabeth crawled to the window and watched, heart slamming against her ribs. The first rider tried to come down the slope fast. Wade Mercer fired once. The man tumbled off his horse dead before he hit the ground. The second rider took cover behind a boulder, firing wild shots toward the cabin. Wade Mercer waited, silent, focused. Then one shot. The man's head snapped back. Silence again. The last rider hesitated, and for a moment it looked like he might retreat, but something changed. Maybe pride. Maybe fear of marsh. Maybe he just hated the idea of failure. He charged. And then something no one expected happened. Annabeth stepped outside. Wade Mercer shouted, but it was too late. She stood between him and the attacker, holding an old shotgun she'd found beneath the bed. Her hands shook. Her aim was unsure, but her eyes were steady. The rider raised his gun. Wade Mercer moved fast, stepping in front of her. Just as the shot rang out, he didn't fall, but blood bloomed across his side like red ink on paper. Before the attacker could fire again, Annabeth pulled the trigger. The blast knocked her backward, but the rider went down hard, dragging dust and silence with him. She scrambled to her feet, running to Wade Mercer. He knelt now, one hand pressed to the wound. You're hurt, she cried. He grunted. You think? She laughed, half in panic, half in disbelief. I thought I told you to stay inside, he muttered. I thought I told you I didn't want more blood. She fired back, holding a cloth to his side. For the first time he smiled, just barely. Guess we both lied. She helped him inside, laid him on the bed and pressed her hand to his chest to feel his heartbeat. Still strong, still here. Outside, the bodies of their would-be killers lay cooling in the sun. Inside, something else was alive, something that hadn't been there before. Not just survival, but loyalty, and maybe, just maybe, love. The bleeding stopped by morning, but the ache remained in his ribs, in her chest, in the air between them. Annabeth sat at his bedside, pressing fresh cloth to the wound every few hours. He never complained, even when the pain twisted his jaw tight. He only watched her with quiet eyes, as if memorizing her face, in case he didn't wake the next day. But he did, and the day after that. By the third morning he sat up on his own, the scar already darkening, angry but healing. "You'll live," she said, folding a rag over her knee. He gave a single nod. "Damn shame," she chuckled. But there was no joy in it, only relief. They ate together again that night, slowly, in silence. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. A moth danced near the lantern, and outside coyotes called to one another like old ghosts still wandering. Wade Mercer broke the silence. "I never thought I'd see peace again," he said. "Not like this." She tilted her head. "Is this peace?" His eyes met hers. "It's the closest I've ever come." She took a breath, staring at the cup in her hands. "Do you believe in redemption?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the old Bible on the shelf, the one with the broken spine and Amelia's name inside. Then he looked back at her. "I believe in earning it." She nodded slowly. "So do I." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then softly she reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. He didn't stiffen. Their fingers interlaced like it had been waiting to happen from the very beginning. The next day she found herself singing. It was quiet, almost accidental, a hymn she hadn't sung since she was a child, soft and cracked but still alive. Her lips. She was washing linen by the well when she heard him pause behind her. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt. When she turned, he was just standing there, arms crossed, a strange softness in his eyes. "You have a voice," he said. She smiled. Took a while to remember. The wind shifted then. It brought the scent of rain, real rain on the horizon, dark and full. She looked up. "It's going to rain," he nodded. "We'll need to catch it." They placed barrels outside, and for a moment they stood together in the open, their faces tilted toward the sky like children. When the rain finally came, it wasn't gentle. It poured, cold, clean, alive. Annabeth laughed, spinning once beneath the drops. Wade Mercer stood motionless, water dripping from his coat, but there was a smile tugging at his mouth, just enough to be real. Inside the cabin, later that night, she watched him clean the last of the blood from his shirt. She stepped close and reached for the rag in his hands. "Let me." He allowed it. Her fingers moved gently, wiping away the dried edges. Then she pressed her palm against the scar over his wrist. His heart beat steady beneath it. "Will you stay?" she asked. His answer was simple. "If you'll have me." She met his eyes. "You already know I will." That night, for the first time, he laid down beside her. Not as a protector, not as a stranger, but as a man who had finally stopped running. And she, as a woman who had finally been heard. They arrived at the town of Clayridge, just as the sun began to set, bathing the buildings in amber light and long shadows. It had been months since Annabeth had last stepped into a town, and everything felt unfamiliar. Too clean, too loud, too alive. But she didn't flinch. Not this time. Wade Mercer rode beside her, his presence as steady as ever. He hadn't said much since they passed the last ridge, but he didn't need to. His silence was no longer a barrier. It was a promise. The townsfolk stared. She saw the sideways glances, the whispers, the old women nudging each other on porches. Some recognized, or some thought they did. All of them judged. But she didn't bow her head. She walked tall, into the general store, into the post office, into the church, with Wade Mercer always just a few paces behind. He never told them who he was. He didn't have to. The way he stood near her, the way his hand rested on the hilt of his revolver without tension, but with certainty. It said everything. She found work within a week. The schoolhouse had lost its teacher to illness, and the children were in need of guidance. Some of the mothers objected. At first, they remembered the rumors, the old stories, but the children loved her. She sang while she taught. She taught them to read, to draw, to ask questions no one had dared ask before. Within weeks, the classroom was full. Wade Mercer took work in the livery, quiet, hands always busy. He fixed saddles, repaired gates, kept to himself. The other men respected him. They didn't ask about his past. Some had seen his type before. Too dangerous to mock, too broken to challenge. They shared a small cottage behind the school. Simple and clean. 2 rooms, 1 bed, a small garden that she insisted on planting. Every Sunday she went to church, not because she believed it would save her, but because she knew what it meant to show her face, to be visible, to exist where they said she shouldn't. Some people never looked her in the eye, some did, but no one dared call her a liar again. One afternoon, as she swept the front porch, a girl from town approached, no older than 12, with pigtails and a missing front tooth. She handed Annabeth a folded piece of paper. "It's for you," the girl said. "Teachers gotta get mail too." Annabeth opened it. Inside was a single sentence, scrawled in uneven handwriting. "I heard what they did. You didn't deserve. I'm glad you're alive." There was no name, just a dried flower pressed into the fold. Her hands trembled. That night she placed the note inside Eleanor's Bible. When Wade Mercer asked what it was, she smiled. "Proof of what?" he asked. "That sometimes surviving is the loudest truth you can speak." He looked at her for a long time, then pulled her close. They stood there together on the porch watching the sun slip behind the hills, and in that light, she didn't feel broken. She felt whole again, because once they had left her for dead in the desert, but now she had come back, not as a victim, but as a woman who had been saved, seen and chosen to stay standing. Sometimes the people the world tries hardest to erase are the ones with the strongest voices. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt judged, silenced, or left behind, know that you're not alone. There is always a road back. Sometimes, it begins in the silence of someone who chooses to stay. Tell us in the comments, what part of Annabeth's journey resonated most with you? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the ones that matter. Your voice belongs here. We'll be waiting for you in the next story.